Today we're going
Take
to
it
talk
away.
about visualizing the Toronto Stock Exchange and its market on close facility with Altair. So yeah, so let's just, so what is Altair? Altair is a visualization library in Python, and sort of the thing that differentiates it from Matplotlib and Bokeh and many others is perhaps the amount of code that you need to write to get a graph, especially like even a simple graph. And then yeah. So one of the reasons for that is it follows the grammar of graphics. And William Headley, one of the people who sort of took these rules, this grammar of graphics, and implemented it in ggplot, describes it as like a tool to describe the components of a graphic. So the same way that we have a sentence and we have verbs and we have a structure and all these components, these amazing people went and took it and tried to describe that with a graph. And then, so Altair is the implementation of that on top of Vega Lite. So if you're trying to do like a crazy graphic that's sort of out of the ordinary, you'd probably be better using D3. And then if it's more common, like a force graph or an edge bundling graph or something, again, a little bit out there, but well known and well established use cases, you'd use Vega. And these are all JavaScript libraries. And then finally, if you wanted to do some statistics on your data, you probably don't need to go so far out there. And there's they've established these rules of how to make graphs easily. So Altair is that implementation of Vega Lite, which is again in JavaScript. So what are the advantages of Altair is that the source data can easily be transformed. And what does that mean is that like Altair basically works in three steps. You have the data, then you mark it, then you encode it, or if you need to transform it, it would be data, transform, mark, encode. And then finally, if you need to filter it, you would filter it at the end. So that's sort of like the basic building blocks to building a graph in Altair, but it's also we could see that it's a nice generalized rule. The other interesting thing about Altair is all the color schemes and a lot of the documentation, um, especially like style documentation, is all in Vega Lite or in Vega. And I even went to D3 documentation at some point to do something with, I can't remember, but with dates I wanted to see, and it was in D3. But this is all good because we're not reinventing the wheel here. It's all built on solid fundamentals. All right. So a couple things when you started, or I had difficulties when I started Altair, and still have difficulties, but there's some best practices. If you have over 5,000 rows, or I can't remember if it's rows or data points, then you need to disable the max rows. And you can just do alt.data transformers, what you see here on the screen. And now you can run your notebook or you can run your graph, see your graph with more than 5,000 rows. Problem is that it's very RAM intensive. The way that Altair stores its data is according to the Vega specifications, and those specifications, every graph that you do has all the data inside of it, literally all the data inside of it. So you can imagine these notebooks get really, really large if you keep on making new and new graphs. So it's a really good practice to just make it into a URL and reuse components. And I'll show you how you basically set up a Altair server in one line of code. All right, so a little bit about the data that we're going to visualize is it's collected every day after 5 p.m. It's I get there's an important data column here called the imbalance reference price, and that's the price at 1540, which the TSX publishes. Well, it doesn't publish it, but it publishes on the website where the midpoint was at 1540 when they published the actual imbalance. And we'll sort of go into the details of that. And then with Yahoo Finance, I get close and market sectors and volume. Actually, I find some of the Yahoo data a little more accurate than the TSX imbalance price, but I think that's because of the bid-ask offer on some of these stocks. So here's just an example of the data that we collected. Just a sample. You could see that there's imbalance side can actually have sells and buys, and that's going to be this fourth column here. It can be sells and buys, and this is the reference price, and then the size is how many shares there are to buy or sell at the close. In an enterprise environment, you would actually get this data through TSX Binary Feed. You'd be co-located on this at the TSX, and you'd use Bloomberg for most of your Yahoo type data. So just a warning, the data hasn't been properly cleaned, and most of the errors I think are coming from the reference price. So again, I said no bid-ask spreads, midpoints, and all the anything you see in dollars is in Canadian dollars. Okay, so here are the requirements. And this is sort of another feature that I like about Altair is if you were using Bokeh or Matplotlib, is like you'd start importing all these modules within the library. And with Altair, you only have to import 2. And then if you have a data server, you can see here, you just enable the data server and off you go. So basically, you're just grabbing your data off a URL, and it's not populating in the notebook. The other thing is I talked about reusability, and this is sort of like I had this data frame that I downloaded from my database, and then I just put it into this base.alt, which is a chart. It's just the data itself, actually. All right, so what is the market on closed facility? So think about it this way. There's all these large institutions all over the world, and so they're buying and selling shares for all sorts of customers. They could be mutual funds, they could be index funds, they could be asset managers, whoever, large institutions, and they all have needs to maybe they need to raise some cash because the market's tanking and a bunch of people called up the mutual fund and they want to liquidate their account, and so now the mutual fund needs to sell some shares to fulfill the cash that they need to give their customers. And so the market on close, the U.S. has the same thing, but it's because it's a more liquid market. We'll see the impact isn't as big. But the TSX market on close is the last auction that you can do that. So, so again, I talked about who uses it, but it's like when they can't fulfill their obligations, then they finally say, you know what, I need to sell 500 shares, or I need to buy 500,000 shares, or whatever the number of shares is, and I have to get it executed by the end of the trading day. All right, so basically, I hope you guys can see it. It's a little bit small, but basically, there's about 400 symbols a day that trade on the market on close on the facility. And on the right-hand side, we can sort of see like a slight distribution of buy minus sells. So you can see that most of the time there are more buys than sells in the market on close. So now we're going to look at the market cap of the companies, the type of companies that trade on the close. And you can see that most of it, and I can imagine that in the US it's the same thing, but most of our the largest companies in Toronto are financial companies, and it's about 10 billion. And then we have basic materials, which are like gold and silver. And so Toronto has a ton of these, I'll call them small cap stocks that, and you'll see some prices are like stocks that trade 50 cents that trade on the MOC. So how many dollars trade. Like, so what's the daily dollar amount that gets traded every day? And it can get pretty substantial. So we could see that, like, from, especially like this is March 31st, which is a end of quarter. Almost $800 million worth of shares. There were almost $800 million worth of shares to buy and sell on the closing prints itself. All right, so how does it work? Before 1540, a customer can enter their market on close order either as a buy or sell for a particular instrument. At 1540, the TSX actually publishes to the website that we're scraping, but also to their feed. And I emphasize random because it's not completely random, but a random sequence of ticker symbols with their imbalance size. Basically. And we could see here like 34,000 shares, 46,000 shares, 460,000 shares. So it could be, 100 shares, and it could be 100,000 shares. And so what, yeah, sorry, that returns. Yeah. Right. And so after 1540, we sort of, what happens is that market makers at 1540, what you'll do is that you'll end up buying the stock or selling with the side of the imbalance, and then you'll do the opposite on the closing prints. And so here are the returns by date of the market on close. So this is each circle here is a symbol. So for example, this is TEV, and its imbalance price, imbalance size was 390 shares, and it was an imbalance to sell, and the stock went down. To $3.04. It went up to $3.49. So the side of the imbalance was against the imbalance direction, if you will. Down below here, as you can see, two returns for you can see returns for buys and sells according to whether it was an imbalance to sell or an imbalance to buy. And on the right hand side is filter data. So I took away all the preferred stocks. I took all the unit trust stocks away, and it didn't change the shape of the return, or it didn't change the density or the shape of the return that much. But it did get rid of some outliers. So as you, so after 1540, all orders are entered. All orders are entered, and if you want to enter an order for a closing print, it has to be against the imbalance. So if the imbalance side was to buy and you want to sell that particular symbol, then you're allowed to do it. But if the imbalance side was to buy and you want the closing side, you cannot enter a buy market on close. And so as you can see actually from the graph above, like earlier, that we have these buys and sells. If you literally went with every buy imbalance and with every sell imbalance and then did the opposite on the close, you could see you can make, there's your P&Ls every day. You would make money on on this trade basically. And the interesting thing about this is like all public information, and it's just it's a function. This trade is a function of market constraints, of like, one, liquidity, and two, that people have to do things by a certain time. So here I just started playing around with factors a little bit, and I wanted to see like if there was anything that was like motivating these returns. And we could see that on the right hand side, we have imbalanced dollar delta, which is how large. So it's basically the imbalance price times the number of shares. And you can see here that there's a small, there's probably like a positive correlation here. So I didn't do any interactions with Altair. I didn't do any brushing or any of that. So my next steps are to understand Altair's interactions and transformations. I want to run this with a decision tree and see if we can get better results, and then begin implementing a simple reinforcement learning. And so here's my some sources, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Itay. Can we get Itay? Can we give Itay a round of applause in the live chat on YouTube? Yeah. There you go. It's got my applause in my apartment. It sounds really sad and empty when I do it here. But yeah, it was great talk. I learned a lot. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I really like the way like Altair makes things very like interactive. What are some of like the versus other like using Altair? Like, what are some advantages of using Altair versus a different visualization library?
So I was actually gonna, I had a lot of iterations of this, but I wanted to do a bar chart with Bokeh, like a stacked bar chart with Bokeh. And let me just go on. Well, if anybody actually wants to, they could just look up stacked bar chart in Bokeh, and you can just see the number of lines of code to do it, and it's daunting. And with Altair, it's like literally 4 lines of code, basically. I mean, once you get the hang of it, and it's took me a little bit, but once you start understanding the rules, the grammar rules, you can go very quickly with Altair. You can make very complex graphs, unlike these.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing how you can do like so much in like a few lines of code.
Yeah.
If people are interested in digging deeper, Jake Vanderplas,
Yeah.
who is one of the folks behind Altair, he gave a fantastic tutorial from PyCon a couple years back. So take a look. A really great way to get started with that library.
There's two tutorials that he gave. He gave one in 18 and 2019, and they're both really good. They're both worth watching.
I love all the content Jake puts out. He's a fantastic asset to our data science community.
And actually, just quickly, he is one of the first people that I saw maybe 4 or 5 years ago start doing blogs in the Jupyter notebook. So
yeah, his blog was a huge inspiration for me to like get started sharing knowledge. Like, yeah, it's amazing stuff. We have a question come in from Joe Jasinski.
Yeah.
Can you apply different themes to these graphs in Altair?
Yeah. So you have basically the Vega themes. I mean, you can make your own custom themes, but you can just go to the Vega documentation, and I have a link for it somewhere up top. But
Will you be able to make these slides available?
But there isn't as many as, let's say, Seaborn or some of the others. It's more limited to the number of themes that you have.
Cool. Would you be able to share a link to these slides so people can go and find that the different themes?
Yeah. Hold on. You can see that. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I was going to try to find it. How do I?
Okay, awesome. Well, if anybody has any other questions while we're waiting for those to come in, Itay, do you have? I know you gave a talk on Altair, but do you have another like library or tool that you like using in the Python ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm actually using Prefect a lot. I think that's the tool that I've been investing the most amount of time in. And yeah, it's just for workflows, basically.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of great things about Prefect. Actually, a lot of great things from you about Prefect. Just to give a shout out, San Francisco Python has an event coming up next month, and there's going to be a 10-minute talk on Prefect there. So check out their meetup. They're a fantastic group. Grace Law does an amazing job. We actually took a lot of the things that we learned about this live stream from the way they handled their response to COVID. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions, but before we do let you go, do you have any
there we go.
Any did you find it?
Yeah, color schemes right there.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, check out Vega color schemes. Looks like it will just pop up right there.
Yeah,
And
there you go.
I also do want to get a shout out for the JavaScript. Do you have a preferred JavaScript library for interactive graphs? Thanks to Derek for sending that in.
So I tried D3. I mean, I guess I would right now. I would use Vega Lite. That would be the. I haven't used it yet, but I have used D3 a lot for network graphs, and it's really complicated. Like it's just too much code. So I think I would probably use Vega Lite for statistical visualizations, and then and yeah, that's JavaScript.
I will. There's a couple of great projects that are trying to like wrap graphs made in D3 like with React components. So if you just search for like D3 React, there's a couple of great libraries that I've sort of just like playing around with.
So Vega is wraps uses D3 as a layer.
Basically. Yeah, it's just another layer. But yeah, there's many options out there. Definitely, all of them are great. But before we do let you go, do you have any action items or words of wisdom for our audience?
None. What do you mean action items like in terms of this project or in general?
In general, like keep safe, have fun.
Yeah, just keep on learning, like that's it. That's
cool. Awesome. And it's like I also do want to give like yes, we're all talking about learning things, but you know what? We also need time to decompress. So if you find yourself sort of like burning it a little bit too much at work and sort of on the side, take that time off to recharge. My company's actually doing a recharge day on Friday where none of us are like allowed to work. So it's fantastic. So we got a 4-day weekend. Itay, are you excited about your 4-day weekend?
No, there's no 4-day weekend. I mean, I just like doing this stuff, so I have so many tools I want to play with, and like
yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again for giving this talk, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.